If I could go back in time and tell myself anything when I first started the business, I think it would be like, enjoy this sweet spot, but while you're here, like enjoying these referrals and this work, start building your pipeline. Because that's where I struggled. I was like, I'm going to be able to depend on this forever. And that dried up.
Welcome to the Smart Gets Paid podcast with me, Leah Niederthal. I help women land higher paying clients in their independent consulting businesses, but I've never been a salesperson. My background is in corporate marketing, and when I started my first consulting business, I learned pretty quickly that it's about 1,000 times harder to sell your own stuff than it is to sell someone else's. So I taught myself how to do it, and I created the sales approach that I now share with my clients, so they can feel more comfortable in the sales process, get more of the right clients, and get paid way more for every client contract. So whether your client contracts are $5,000, $100,000, or more, if you want to work with more of the clients you love, do more of the work you love, and get paid more than you ever thought you could, then you're in the right place. Let's do it together. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to rate, review, and share. Hey there, Leah here, and thanks for tuning in. I hope wherever you are right now, wherever you're listening to this, I hope you're having a great week, making some good progress in your business, and taking some time for you. So when I was 17, I became a published children's book illustrator. Seriously. I was in a drawing class at my school, and the whole class was invited to submit illustrations for a children's book that was in the works, all about Italy, called Positively Italy. And I drew a picture of a Renaissance woman. Picture a woman sort of wearing a hat that you'd expect to see in like the 1500s, right? Like with a sort of structured hat part kind of extending out to the sides and a long, veil that hangs down the back. I worked really hard on that picture of the Renaissance woman, and I felt really proud of it. And of all the drawings from my class that were sent off to the author, mine and a couple others were picked for the book. And so when my drawing of the Renaissance woman made it into this book, Positively Italy by Virginia McLean, I became a published children's book illustrator. I mean, have I done anything super artistic since? Not really to that level. I mean, I always say I'm creative, but I'm not all that artistic. And I mean, it's funny now because anyone who knows me knows I'm like, okay at drawing. If my kids say like, draw a dinosaur, I can draw a dinosaur. But I'm certainly not an artist by any means, and certainly not to the level of a children's book illustrator. But I have a real appreciation for children's books, especially now that I'm reading so many of them to my kids. And now what's kind of cool is that my son can read, and he can sort of read those books back to me. And there's something so special about what a children's book can do, the messages it can communicate and the way it can make us feel. Like, how does a story about a monkey who wakes up on the wrong side of the bed show us that it's okay to stop fighting how we feel and just be grumpy? And in letting us feel our feelings, we actually start to feel better. That one is Grumpy Monkey. It's one of my kids' favorites. And children's books can help kids feel their feelings, understand their environment, and really bring concepts down to their level and just help them make sense of the world and their place in it. And that last one, making sense of the world and their place in it, is exactly what drove the woman I'm talking to today to write her own children's book. Today, I'm talking to Kathy Guillory, who in her real work, air quotes, real work, she's a marketing consultant for multi-location businesses. And when I started working with Kathy, she had been in business for a few years and had done, fairly well. But like a lot of women, she was relying entirely on referrals from her network. And that well had kind of run dry. She had a couple clients, but no real sales process, no pipeline. It was kind of like flying by the seat of her pants, just figuring things out project by project, which is interesting, although not really surprising because she comes from a long marketing career. But, as many of us have found out, coming from a marketing background isn't the same thing as being able to market and sell your own services. So fast forward to today, and not only is she landing bigger, more lucrative contracts, but she's also created something most consultants think is impossible: actual free time. And in her case, time to do something she'd wanted to do for a long time: write a children's book. But not just any children's book. It's a story about a little girl who moves to a country where she doesn't know the language, she doesn't know anyone, and she has to find her brave. It's Kathy's story, from when she came to the US as a political refugee from the former Soviet Union in the early 90s. I have the book. It's so heartwarming, and I'm going to let her tell you about it in our conversation. And I can't wait for you to hear how she was able to grow her business in a way that created the time and the space to pursue her creative passion. So in this conversation, you're going to hear this surprisingly simple question that Kathy started asking her CEO clients that completely shifted how they saw her and how she controlled her project timelines. You'll hear why having 18 years of marketing experience actually made it harder for Kathy to get clients and the mindset shift that changed everything. You'll hear how Kathy learned to stagger her retainer clients so she'd have weeks of uninterrupted time, and that's the time she used to write and publish the book. And you'll hear about the exercise that helped Kathy stop optimizing for just money or just learning and start building a business that actually gave her space for what mattered most. Basically, you're going to hear how Kathy built a business that funds her life and gives her the space to create. So if you've ever worried that if you grow your consulting business and you want to make more money, you'll end up working all the time and you won't have time for anything else, I hope Kathy's story will show you that it doesn't have to be the case. So take a listen to my conversation with Kathy Guillory, and at the end, I'll come back and share a lesson that you can apply to your business. And then hopefully someday soon, you'll partner with us to help you build your consulting business, and you'll come back on the podcast and share your story. Enjoy. Kathy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be in the hot seat.
The hot seat. It's a love seat. It's not a hot seat. It's a love seat. Kathy, why don't we start at the beginning? Why don't you tell the good people who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm excited to be here. My name's Kathy Guillory. I'm a fractional CMO with Bell Bear Marketing, and I was a member of the Academy for a year. And now, most recently, I also published a children's book that I'm very, very excited to talk about and share with all of you.
Yeah. Oh, I can't wait to get into it. So, Kathy, let's sort of back up a little bit. What were you doing before you started your business?
Yeah, I was in corporate. I did corporate marketing for 18 years. So consumer facing corporate marketing, my last job was for a private equity firm where we managed marketing for 155 unique brands all across the country. They were in the pet care space. So it was 155 websites, 155 social media accounts, 155 like physical locations and ads and all of that, email lists, you name it. It was marketing on steroids.
Oh my God. Every person who comes from a marketing background who's listening to this, I think their head is exploding. That is a lot. And now, you know what, I want to push you on this. You do marketing through Bell Bear Marketing because you don't just do marketing. Can you say more about the specific type of client that you work with? Because I think it's so interesting.
Yeah, so my niche has always been this multi-location franchise marketing space. It's just where I have so much of my experience, and the needs and challenges of businesses that really do have a large geographic footprint are so different. You know, you're trying to streamline marketing in New York City, and then you have another practice or another clinic in rural Texas, right? Like you need really different strategies that you can scale at the national level to be able to deliver the same results and to have the same results from your marketing spend. So that's really where I've been focusing for the last 2 years since the start of the business.
I think it's so cool because when you started talking to me about it, I was like, it's not just like high level marketing. It's really, you can bring it down to like the location level in a multi-location company. I mean, and you're really getting like people through the door.
Absolutely. That's the whole point, right? That's part of it. So my ICP, when you really look at the ideal client profile, when I sat down and did that work with your team as well through the academy, it was 3 or more physical locations that are delivering a service. So it's not necessarily a store, right? It's not like e-commerce, which is its own subcategory of marketing. These are service-driven organizations. So they're, like lawn care companies or, vet clinics, pet care centers, med spas, banks. It's really like where your service is delivered in store or in the facility. And so you're trying to drive foot traffic in the door.
Yeah. I mean, it really is like classic marketing, right? Like if you sort of look at the historical, use of that. And so a few years into your business, like, what was going on when we started to work together? I always like to ask, you reached out for a reason. What was the reason?
I reached out in, I believe, May of 2024. That sounds right. It was May of 2024. Been in the business for just shy of a year. I'd had a couple of clients under my belt. All of them came through my internal network. I know it's something you talk about a lot in the program, right? You announce like, oh, I'm starting my own business, and everybody flocks to you. And you have a good 6-7 months of business. And then all those leads all those contacts dry up and you're like, hey, I started my own business. And then nobody comes through the door because you already dried up your existing network. So you need to start selling your services to people who don't know you.
But wasn't it great for a time? I mean, wasn't that
It was
sort of
wonderful.
nice
It was wonderful.
for a time? Right.
It was wonderful. If I could go back in time and tell myself anything when I first started the business, I think it would be like, enjoy this sweet spot. But while you're here, like enjoying these referrals and this work, start building your pipeline. Because that's where I struggled. I was like, I'm going to be able to depend on this forever. And that dried up, right? So about 6, 7 months in, it dried up. And so around May, I had a couple of leads. I actually first saw you. I can't remember what came first. It was either a LinkedIn post or a podcast, but they came very close together. So either like I found one and then found the other. But it was something very, very specific about your business to consumer marketing is not going to get you your B2B consulting leads. And I was just like, wow, she is in my head, right? Like that's exactly the problem I was having. Because I mean, I'd been doing marketing for 18 years. Like how hard can it be, right? But sales process was different. The lead times were different. The different stakeholders I was talking to were completely different. Like I actually needed to build a sales process and a sales pipeline. And that's something I've never had to do to that extent, right? With my consumer brands, because it was like, put up a vet clinic, do ads, people come in, they either don't come in or they come in, right? It wasn't like they wait 6 months to come in. So that one soundbite really, like it's almost like, you can't use your B2C marketing expertise. It's not going to work to help build your B2B consulting business. And that's exactly what I was finding. So I remember I reached out and I think I moved pretty quickly. I was like, yeah, let's just do this. Right. So I kind of jumped in and did a lot of the coursework over the summer, started really following the content framework, kind of building the relationships based on trust, having a lot of these conversations, that a year later has really grown the business to, I think, more than I was expecting in such a short period of time.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about it. So, building your pipeline, I think as a marketer and now as a business owner, obviously you knew that was important, but what did you want it to do for you? Right. I mean, obviously besides getting clients that will give you money and, all these things,
Sure.
like do great work. What were you hoping that having a full pipeline would do sort of for you and for the business?
I was hoping it would free up a lot of my time. So before I started my own business, I was working, for a PE firm. I was very, very busy. I was working 80 hours a week. I just really needed a way to find better balance in my life. I want to be able to pursue other projects, like travel with my family and take a couple of weeks off here and there. Right around the same time that I started the business, I started writing my children's book. And so it was very much in kind of storyboard format. It had, some like rough AI art sketches for what it would look like, but certainly hadn't put any like time or thought or effort into it. And so I was like, I really, really want to set this goal, right? That I'd like to get this done. Like I'd like to get this book, written and illustrated and published. And I'm not a creative person in those terms. Like I can't draw to save my life. So I knew I would have to find a publisher and an illustrator and kind of manage that whole process that also took time. Right. So I, started the business. I was so busy kind of getting pulled in different directions. I put the book on hold for a little while. I started with the academy. I did the coursework. I started getting some leads. I started building my pipeline. And then around the beginning of the year, I had some capacity in between clients. And so I was able to, put head down, finish the story, finish the storyboards. I found a hybrid publisher, just kind of the best of both worlds. Their whole value prop is they're democratizing the publishing process. So before it was like 3 or 4 publishing houses you had to go through to really publish a book, or you could do it yourself, but they're the best of both worlds. They you put up a little bit of money, they put up a little bit of money, you kind of go in. And then once it's published and once it's out, you get a larger share of the sales than you would with a traditional publisher. So that's cool. It really turned me on to them. And then you also get full creative control and creative direction. And the story was, it was my story, right? It was my immigration story. It was my, the love story between me and my grandmother, who was the most influential person in my life, I would say, so far at least. And so it was really, I wanted control over it. I didn't want some old white guy in a suit, right? Sitting in, New York City, like marking it up going, nope, this is wrong, right? This won't sell. Like I wanted to retain that creative control. And they, really enabled me to do that. So that was awesome.
Yeah. Of all the sort of creative pursuits out there, because you wanted to be able to, I'm guessing you didn't want to go back to 80 hours a week, right? You wanted to sort of have this space and freedom to do this. Of all the things you could be doing, why a book and why this story?
So why a book is like a question. I have young kids. My kids are 5 and 6.5, and we read a lot. They're of the age where like they're reading the Bernstein Bears and Paddington, and we've always just read to them since they were little. And now they're at the point where like they're starting to learn to read, and it's just such a big part of our culture, such a big part of like what we do as a family, right? They come home from school, we eat dinner, we read, and then we go to bed. And so, I'm always looking for like good kind of positive affirmative messages, right? What do I want to teach them? Is there something that they're struggling with? And there's little material out there that kind of tackles some of the harder topics for kids, right? There's a lot of like, happy, kind of fluffy type content. There's sometimes like a little bit heavier content, but for the most part, there's very little like in between. And this particular story was, it was my immigration story. It was about moving to an all new place where I didn't know anybody, where I didn't speak the language, where nobody really looked like me or talked like me. And so I just want them to kind of see the examples of like resilience and, being welcoming to others who are coming in from perhaps a similar background. And then ultimately, the story is also about just building self-confidence. It has like this little affirmation theme in the middle of it where it starts off with her grandmother kind of telling her these three words, you're kind, you're curious, you're brave, you can do anything. And then later on in the story, she actually looks in the mirror and says those words herself. And when she says those words herself, her magic cape appears. And so it's kind of this like transference of like her grandma's confidence. She's borrowing her grandma's confidence. And then at the very end, she becomes self-confident and sort of what that means. So I think it's a positive message. I think in today's world with so much negativity around, kind of immigrants and people who are not even immigrants, but just people who are kind of othered, right? Who may be a little bit different than you for whatever reason. I think it's just important to think of the human side of it.
Absolutely. And how old were you when you made that journey?
So I was 9 and I moved from the former USSR with my family, and I didn't speak, barely any English. And a lot of it's like very parallel, right? Packed up our stuff and we left. We actually came as political refugees in the early 90s. So I started a school where I was the only person who, spoke Russian, didn't speak a lot of English. We moved to Los Angeles, and LA was a very diverse community. So at least like everybody there was also, from somewhere else. So that part helped. But I remember the only native English speaker in my third grade class was our teacher, Miss Chicopee, and she was from upstate New York. Like everybody else either had Spanish as a second language. A lot of kids were from Asia. There were a couple of kids from kind of all over the place, but I was the only Russian.
Oh, wow. I mean, it's one thing to come to a whole other country and have to learn that language, and also to be thrown in with all of these other kids who have their own sort of languages and, getting comfortable in their own way, right?
Right.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So being able to tell this story or, a version of this story to sort of inspire, I mean, what did it feel like to sort of see this come to life?
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. So, really, really exciting. The day we got our first couple of copies of the book was just super exciting. My girls were like, it's real, it's real, it's real. Because, I would show it to them like on my iPad. I would show them sketches. They were my little internal focus group, I think, and parts of like the drawings and all that. But definitely really cool to like feel it, right? You just know that it's like tangibly going to be there. I'm really excited to share the story. I have a giant 6-foot polar bear cut out of the Bell Bear that I'm going to take with me to some like local book signings, and I'm going to try to go to their school. So I'm just excited to kind of share it with the world and see where it goes. I have a bunch of other stories in mind. I have like 3 or 4 others in the back of my mind. So if this takes off and if she becomes like a really popular character, I'd like to tell those, some of the harder topics like, parents getting divorced, or happy to share some more of my personal journey too. Like I was diagnosed with ADHD a little bit later in life. And, I have a story in mind called Bell Bear Can't Sit Still, which, some kids might be able to relate to that, right? Just to kind of tackle some of those topics that aren't always talked about in children's books. Or if they are, they're always talked about in a very like clinical way, right?
Right, right. So I don't think we've said it out loud. Like, what is the name of the book?
Yeah, it is called The Adventures of Bell Bear. And
where can you find this book?
Yeah, you can find it on Amazon. You can find it in Barnes & Noble. You can find it on Walmart.com, a couple of other places. You can also find it on my website, bellbearbooks.com. So I have it everywhere.
Oh my gosh, it's so cool. And I love that you had the sort of space to do that.
Absolutely.
Can we talk a little bit about how you were able to free up this space? What are some of the things that you did through our work that you think made the biggest difference for you? What are some of those game changers?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was getting confidence around those first few clients. So I, started the business and I had this inflow of work coming in from people I'd known, was getting referrals, but again, no sales process, no real pipeline. What the Academy really helped me do was like be thoughtful about who I was going after. So who I wanted to get in front of, the specific problems I was solving, right? So my niche is pretty well defined, but it's also a pretty large, when you talk about, your total addressable market, right? And there are a lot of different franchise businesses. They're all over the country. Like what is the right size? What's the right fit? What's the right stage of business? For me, the part where I've always felt like I could add the most value is going from small, right? So like less than 10 and really scaling to that 25, 30 range as far as number of locations go. So that's where you start feeling some of the marketing pain points like, do I need to hire more people? Do I need to invest in digital asset management? Do I need to build processes and playbooks? Like when I'm opening a new location, how do I really make it easy so that every single time I go put up a new location, I don't have to start from scratch? And so my work in the academy really helped me like pinpoint exactly not just the type of business, but at what stage of business. So what are some of those like triggers, right? So, we're expanding
Mhm.
into a new market. There's a new CEO. Typically, a marketing leadership turnover is always a big one. So someone's gone through like 2 or 3 marketing leaders and they're in that transitional space where they need someone to come in and just evaluate, right? How are things going? So once I was able to like pinpoint, okay, it's not this huge, right, total addressable market of, 5,000 franchisors, right? It's actually this much smaller subset. And they're also across these 3 or 4 verticals where I've had the most experience. My conversation started making a lot more sense. I really was able to like unlock those conversations earlier in the sales process. And I could really like map out where I could like logically plug into the client's timeline. And it also made it a lot easier to figure out when the client work would be coming in. So a lot of it was like pipeline building, but then also managing the timeline of when that would start. I think the fractional model is a little bit different from just traditional consulting in that it's not always short-term project based, right? So I'll come in and I'll do like a short-term project. Typically, I start with a really comprehensive marketing audit that takes 2 to 3 months. And then that almost always leads to like a true fractional engagement where I am a member of the team managing their team as they're building this new infrastructure, as they're opening a new location. So these retainer contracts tend to last, 9 to 12 months, longer even in some cases, which is great because it gives you kind of that predictability, that stability and income while you're looking for your next client. But realistically, I couldn't manage more than 2 retainer clients at the same time just because of my capacity. And,
Right.
the people wanting like overlapping availability for meetings or overlapping availability for, different like team based activities. So what it really allowed me to do was create a pipeline where they weren't overlapping. It was like, okay, one finishes and then I have a couple weeks off to do whatever. And then I have another one starting. And so really kind of staggering them where it makes sense. And that freed me up a lot in the kind of in between place, but also in the, I've been working with this client for a few months. Now it's a little bit on autopilot, right? I can, take 10, 15 hours this week to really focus on my book or really focus on whatever this next project is.
Yeah. So being able to build a pipeline around like your actual best clients,
Hmm.
having better conversations, filling the pipeline, and being able to manage the time. I think this is really important, being able to manage the timeline of stop and start, because that is something that a lot of women consultants struggle with because of the nature of the work, right? You can go
Right.
through times where it's almost like the feast famine cycle is different. It's like, it's a busy, not
Hmm.
as busy cycle, right? But a lot of women don't feel a lot of power in that. They sort of feel like when the client wants to get started, that's when they get started, right? Can you speak to how you were able to not just sort of predict, but like really direct how this goes?
Yeah, I think a lot of it went through just really transparent conversations around that. And I explained to pretty much everybody I talked to that the fractional model is different from just traditional consulting and that I'm integrated in your business. So I'm meeting with the leadership team, I'm usually a member of the leadership team, at least for a period of time. I'm usually managing the team directly. You have to have at least one person on site doing marketing. Otherwise, it's not going to be a good fit because you'll end up paying me to do marketing, and that's just not a good value. So I need like at least one person who's doing the execution. And usually in the fractional model, I'm managing them. So I'm having, one-on-ones. Some of the instances, like I've helped them write goals, like I'm actually there, right? Like an embedded executive. And that's part of the value prop. So what I try to kind of communicate up front is like what you're getting is like me, right? Focused on your business. But in order for me to be focused on your business, I can't be focused on 3 other businesses, right? So kind of setting that expectation up front of like, we can start on your audit with a little bit of overlap with another client, but I can't like really come in and get under the hood until I have the capacity to work on that. And I think once they understand the difference, they've all, so far in my experience, have been really flexible around that. I also try to set expectations around what I expect from them. So when I'm coming in and doing an audit, again, it takes 2 to 3 months. It can go as quickly or as slowly as they want to. And most of that discovery work is done. My audit has 10 parts. It's pretty comprehensive. It's about an hour and a half discussion for each part of that because, like, we're digging into your environment, your competition, your customers, There's usually some prep work they have to do. So I always ask them, because 9 times out of 10, it's going to be with the CEO. And then maybe some members of either the marketing team or the leadership team, depending on the size of the organization. But I ask them if they have the capacity, right, to really kind of sit down and look ahead at their calendar, right? So if I'm going to be asking you to spend, 20 hours on calls with me over the next 2 months on these like really in-depth discovery calls, is that something you can commit to? And that in some cases has led to like revision of timelines, or, in some cases, like one time we did an audit in the spring that took 5 months, and which is perfectly fine, right? I just kind of took the existing engagement and stretched it out. And that gave me a little more flexibility and them a little more flexibility because they were in the middle of another project. I feel like once they can communicate what it actually entails, they completely get it. Because if they want my full attention, if they want my full focus, they don't want me doing the same thing for 3, 4 other clients at the same time, because they're not going to get that value.
Yeah. One other thing I'm hearing here is that asking them, do you have the capacity for this? I think is a really important shift that touches on sort of two things that we talk about in the academy. It's like coming in at a peer level and this idea of make it so, right? If you had not asked those questions, I think a lot of women consultants feel like the client is the boss, right? And they don't feel like they can ask the hard question of like, you, CEO, do you have time for this, right? It takes a certain amount of peering to ask those hard questions, right? And this idea of make it so, like you can actually do it. You can say that.
Right.
It's like, I can't do this faster than you can do it, right?
Right.
And so I think it's a really important shift when we sort of, in service of sort of teaching the client how to think about you and how to think about the work. I know that goes a long way.
It does. I think it makes a really big difference. And that was actually one of my favorite modules in the academy. Just the whole, concept of like, you're the peer, right? Like you're no longer asking, right? You're telling, and you're kind of going in on equal footing, which I think has been really, really beneficial. I don't know that I would have instinctively done that, in relationships with CEOs, because most of the people that I work with, that I work really, really closely with, are CEOs or they're COOs in some cases if their organization's big enough. But, it's not coming in as like an I report to you type of a relationship, right? Like I'm coming in as a peer, and those were sort of the expectations. The other piece I do is shortly after someone signs a contract, I have this like onboarding email and I customize it a little bit, but I just kind of lay out the ground rules, right? I have a similar questionnaire, similar set of questions I ask the CEO, and it has things like, your communication methods, right? What's your preferred communication channel, right? What are your working hours? Like, when do I, not contact you? How do you want to hear about emergencies or wherever else? And I'm pretty transparent, right? Like I tell them that, from 4 to 7 p.m. every night, like you're not going to get a hold of me because I'm taking care of my kids. I'm picking them up from school. We're doing dinner. We're doing story. We're doing bath, right? 9 times out of 10, you're going to hear from me like at 7:15 as I'm catching up on email and I'm scrolling through what I missed while I was out. But, if it's short of an emergency, like don't expect an immediate response. And so I try to set those expectations out up front. And so far, like they've been, really well received, right? We have conversations about time zones that I know a lot of people are a little nervous about, right? Like, oh, I have a client in California or I have a client here. So I try to have those conversations like right up front and set those expectations of like, I work East Coast hours, right? Like you have access to, this subset of my calendar, this is what it means. And so far, I really haven't had a lot of issues with boundaries around that.
That's great. So, I think all of that is so important. And you ended exactly where I was going to pick it up. What you're describing is boundaries, right? And I think that like the fractional model can be very challenging for boundaries because they do get sort of all of you or most of you or a big part of you, right? As opposed to, what we would consider traditional consulting, like air quotes consulting, like I come in and I'm sort of loosely associated with you, but I'm really here to like do a thing and then I leave or whatever. And, that's why I think without these mindset shifts, fractional work can become a job, right?
Yes.
You are sort of being treated like an employee. And so is there anything else? I mean, you've already sort of shared a lot of how you set boundaries up front and like clearly communicate them. But like, is there anything else that you would offer about like how to maintain boundaries in a relationship that can become all consuming?
It can. It can very, very quickly become all consuming. And I think boundaries can only be successful if you communicate them and then they respect them. And then, next time someone tries to push them, you communicate them again. So it's not something you can like set once and forget, right? You almost kind of like always have to go back to them. And, that comes up, right? There's a call after hours that you can't make, right? Just, let them know right away, hey, that's outside of my working hours. If you want to record it, happy to listen to it the next day, right? Really just like reminding them like of your availability, of any other competing priorities that you have. Something I do try to build into my fractional retainer contracts is a little bit of flexibility. And I tell them that up front. So, most of them are hourly based in some capacity, right? So it's usually like a bank of hours. We have 80 hours a month, or we have 60 hours a month, or something along those lines. And they all have a rollover. So I build that in. So like I can roll over hours, or they can roll over my hours for up to 2 months, but it's capped at 2 months. And so that gives us flexibility for like a really big project. So, for instance, I have a client, we just launched a website in July, and I spent a lot of time in July working on that website, right? And I knew that. I knew that up front. They knew that up front. And then I took 2.5 weeks in August off to hang out with my kids before school started. So, like a win win. So, instead of like, paying me a smaller retainer for that month or trying to like nitty gritty calculate all of that, right? All of that was already built in, and I communicated to them up front, right? They knew at the beginning of the summer. It was, hey, I'm going to help with this website launch. I know the team's going to need a lot more of my strategic support and like hands-on testing, right? To bring this to market on this timeline. July is going to be really over, but then August will make up for it. And I think they really appreciate that flexibility too, because that flexibility kind of goes both ways, right? At the end of the day, when you're looking at it on like a 9-month or a 12-month contract, it's going to balance out. It just takes conscious reminding them a couple of steps, along the way that that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else that, you mentioned a few things that really sort of changed your ability to create some of this space. Is there anything else that you learned or incorporated from our work together that really allowed you to sort of create this space to work on the book and other creative things?
Yeah, it's actually a really good question. So something that always stuck with me was the exercise we did early in building blocks, and it was the 3X of profitability, because I'd never really looked at it through that lens, right? It was like, professionally, like what area do you want to learn and grow in? There was the, financial profitability, right? Of like how much money do you want your business to make in a specific period of time? And then there was this personal component to it. And I forget if that's exactly what it was called, right? But it was like, what other area of your life do you want to also like grow, support? And for me, it was just free time to pursue other projects. And this book just happened to kind of naturally be there, right? I knew I wanted to bring it to market. I knew I wanted to document it and bring it to life. And so that made just the most sense. And so I think looking at it through that lens, right? I wasn't like just trying to make as much money as possible, because then my approach would have been a little bit different, right? I wasn't just trying to like learn as much as I could, because then I would have taken on different clients or different projects. But here it was like, how do the three of those kind of intertwine? And where is that happy medium in the middle?
Yeah. So, well, you got it really close. It was professional, financial, and emotional. You got it really, really close. And when you envisioned this like personal or, the emotional part, is that where you really wanted to sort of expand?
It was. That's where I wanted to expand. That's where the book was, because I had it on hold, right? So I'd already had like an outline and a couple of rough sketches. I knew that I wanted to bring it to life. I just didn't know exactly when or how. And so when I was, building the business, right, it was kind of in the back of my mind. Then I got to a certain point where I had, a break in client overlap, a little bit of capacity that freed up. And I was like, well, this is the project I'm going to pick up and do, because it was already there, right? It wasn't like something new I went to go find. It was just there on a shelf. And so I picked it up and was able to kind of bring it over the finish line this year. So it was extra rewarding.
Yeah. Oh, it's so wonderful. Kathy, fill in the blank for me. I almost didn't work with you because...
I honestly don't think I had that moment, because I think I saw that LinkedIn post or I heard that podcast and I was like, I could actually learn something here. So I think I was one of those people you talk to where by the end of our first introductory phone call, I was like, okay, where do I sign? Right. And you were like, oh, we have one more call and you're going to ask me questions. I'm going to ask you questions. And I was like, no, Leah, let's I'm done dating. Like, let's get married. Where do I sign? So I honestly don't think I had that. I think by the time we spoke and by the time I listened, I was already like much farther along in the sales process, that I already knew I was working with you. It was just a matter of like, when do we start?
I love clients like you. But, it's true that honestly, by the time that a lot of people do talk to me or somebody on my team, you've done your research. You've listened to the podcast. For most people, it's not like whether you trust me. It's honestly whether you trust you. That's sort of a lot of people's sticking point, and whether it's spoken or unspoken, right? And so if you were already on board and you trust yourself to do the work, which you fully did, I mean, you dove in wholeheartedly. What else is there to talk about?
Right. Yeah. I just needed a couple of like the, secret sauce ingredients, right? Like I'd already knew marketing. I knew what I wanted to do. I had an idea. I just needed a way to translate that to that B2B marketing. And that was really it, right? Like it was really that when you talk about content, there's a section when you talk about content, When you talk about like writing at the, 303 level courses, right? Like where you're no longer like kind of preaching the 101 basics of what they need, but like you're kind of really
Mhm.
in their head. And that one like line, right? That one soundbite of like, your traditional B2C marketing tactics are not going to get you B2B clients. Like it just stuck with me. And I was like, I'm really not. So I need to learn this. So there's a plug for having smart content as well, right? Making sure that you're speaking your client's language and kind of getting in their heads of what their problem is.
Yeah. And I teach you exactly how to do that. It's so interesting, working with women who come from marketing because you are probably doing a lot of things that are good. We don't blow up anything that's working, right? We don't sort of
Right.
trash anything that's working. We take what's working and make it even better. And, I think especially when you come from marketing, you might have a lot of the ingredients on the marketing side, but as you know, there are two systems. There's the marketing system and the sales system. You can come from an incredible marketing background and the sales system, you're still sort of building that, right? That's the area that's lacking more.
That was the piece for me. It was the sales process, right? Because I'd never actually led a sales process. I did a lot of sales enablement work, right? In terms of like what marketing brings to the table, but I'd never, walked a client through like an offering and what it looks like. And I also had very, very limited experience with engaging with other stakeholders along the way, right? Because B2C marketing is so different. Like you usually have one decision maker, maybe two for a big decision. You certainly don't have five or six who also need to like weigh in from like legal or operations or HR. Like you don't have any of that.
Right.
So that piece was particularly helpful, right? Like how to define that sales process and then also just lead your clients through it.
Yeah. A lot of women I work with have been on the buying side, right? They've been in
Mhm.
positions where they're hiring consultants, but the part that you see is only a fraction, right? So seeing it and being able to lead it from the other side, first of all, is a lot different than you think. And it does take a sales process and understanding how to, what we call navigate the jungle with, different stakeholders
Right.
and whatnot. Kathy, what would you say to somebody who's in the position that you were, you know, back then before we were working together? What advice would you give her?
Yeah, I think just do it, right? Like just do it. Bite the bullet, talk to listen to a couple of the podcasts, read some of the reviews on the website. I think those are really telling too, right? I love that, you have so many of the like stories of different women you worked with over the years, and they're all kind of coming in different verticals, offering different services. I think it's always worth it to invest in yourself and invest in your business. And if sales and marketing is something that you are struggling with, I think this is very much a, program to do it through, right? I learned a tremendous amount. I know I've certainly recommended it to a couple of other consultants along the way.
Thank you. Thank you. And, for somebody like you who sort of has this other creative pursuit, and for all the women who maybe have something that they want to pursue as well, sort of on the side or whatever, and, they're wondering sort of how to juggle it, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah. So my biggest lesson in life is what gets scheduled gets done, right? So I live by my calendar. I have with different client commitments, with different personal things like kids in school, right? Family things like things we have going on. If it's not in my calendar, it's just not going to get done. So, if you want to write a book or if you want to, start training for a marathon or whatever that pursuit is, like put it on your calendar, right? Block off some time. You're the keeper of your own calendar. Block off Friday mornings. Like something that I do is, I don't take meetings on Fridays. I haven't since the start of the business. If there's an emergency or if something drastic goes wrong, right, people know how to get a hold of me. Doesn't mean I'm not working, but I'm not in meetings. I'm not on Zoom calls. I'm not responding to like Slack or Teams messages or any of that, right? So it gives me time and space to kind of either catch up from the week on client work or work on my business or work on something else. And so I just let people know that that's my availability. You're going to have access to me Monday through Thursday during these hours, right? Here's what this looks like. But Fridays, I'm out of pocket. It's an emergency. Call this number, right? But I think I've only had like two phone calls ever, right? And they were for like actual emergencies. So set those boundaries and then just make it so, right? Like you're the keeper of your calendar. So set aside the time to do that. Because if you don't have a designated time at the end of a long day or at the end of 5 or 6 meetings in a row, you're not going to do it.
Yeah.
It's just harder.
I love that reminder that you're in control of your time because I think a lot of women often don't feel like they're in control of your time. But I think the reminder that, yes, actually, you can carve out this space for yourself. I think, like anything, it's not just going to get done on its own, right? The same way that like laundry and dishes and all those things don't just get done on their own, but like this is as important as that, if not more so.
Also put it on the board, put it on your calendar, time block around it. and keep those commitments to yourself, right? I think you did an exercise at the beginning of the year where it was like, it was like a pebbles and rocks exercise, right? So like look at your rocks. I think you had to sit down like on a call, on an accountability call, and like schedule the, vacation you want to take, right? And then like put it on your calendar now. Block off the time that you're going to take, if that's taking a week off once a month or at the end of the quarter or wherever else. Schedule it in advance and do it first, right? So like when you're building your calendar, before you start communicating to the clients or wherever else, like schedule your things, like your time, your family time, your personal time, this emotional time first, and then communicate to them what is left over, not the other way around. Because if you just open your availability to people, they're going to take what they want when they can. And then, you end up with like bits and pieces, 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there. It's not going to be enough to really pursue a meaningful project.
Yeah. Well, and we're doing that training again coming up in the Academy. It's one of my favorite ones. It's,
I loved it.
Year planning. But, if anybody's listening to this and you've done a sort of exercise that's like the pebbles and the rocks and the sand or whatever, the way we do it is a little different. We do have the rocks and the pebbles and the sand, but the rocks are you, right? The rocks are your time, your vacations, if anybody has ever accidentally like worked on their birthday or their anniversary or whatever, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't carve out that time, you will not take it and somebody else will. So yeah, that's a really, really valuable exercise when you realize that you're the rocks.
Mm-hmm. Right. So make it a rock. Whatever your project is, make that the rock.
Oh, I love it. Yes. Kathy, where can people find you?
Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Kathy Guillory. And then you can find me on my website, bellbearmarketing.com. And then I also have a second website for my book called bellbearbooks.com. It's all under the big Bell Bear brand. And that's where you can see me.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
All right. What a great conversation, right? Kathy's story is so inspiring. From building her business to publishing a children's book that tells her own story. Not to mention the whole journey from her former life to the US. And if you want to check out The Adventures of Bell Bear, which I highly recommend, you can find it wherever you buy books and on Kathy's website at bellbearbooks.com. So as always, I like to pull out one lesson from these conversations that you can apply to your business. And the lesson I really want you to take from this episode is this. You don't have to choose between making money and having time for yourself. You can have both, but only if you optimize for both. So in the Academy, we talk about the 3 types of profitability for consultants. We call it 3X profit. There's financial profitability. That's the money you're making. There's emotional profitability, which is doing the work you love with clients you enjoy. And then there's emotional profitability, having fun, feeling good about your business, and having time for what matters to you. And here's what I see happen all the time. Most women consultants are only thinking about financial profitability as the measure of success. And of course, who would blame us, right? We've been told for years to think about the financial part as the measure of our abilities and our success. That's what we thought about early in our careers. Maybe we heard that from our families of origin. It's why we went to college and got good jobs. Like when you were early in your career, burning the midnight oil because you were the most junior person and had the most sort of grunt work to do. No one was coming up to you at that point and being like, you really need to think about your emotional wellness. At least that didn't happen in the years when I started working. And of course, things cost money, right? So yeah, money matters, of course. But when you only optimize for money, then you end up in that trap of saying yes to every client, taking on too much work, and having no time for anything else. And then you look up one day and you're making good money, you're great money, but you're exhausted and you have no space for yourself. And then of course, it's no wonder that if you think about like, how do I make more money? People assume that you just have to do more and get busier, which can make you say, nope, no thanks, I'm good, and just sort of stay where you are, with the belief that doing more is the only way to make more money. But when you think about all 3 types of profitability, financial, professional, and emotional, you start making different decisions. You start thinking about not just how much you're making, but also whether you like the work and the clients, and whether you have time for the things that fill you up. This 3X profit methodology is woven throughout our work in the Academy. And one way we put this into practice is through an exercise that Kathy mentioned in our conversation, and I just want to sort of run through it with you. It's this rocks, pebbles, and sand exercise we do to plan the year ahead, but we do it in a different way than most people do. Because typically what you'll hear is people say, okay, your big clients are the rocks, or, your big projects are the rocks. And then the small projects are the pebbles or whatever, right? That's how most people have seen this done. The way we do it flips that around. You are the rocks. Your time, your vacations, your creative projects, your Friday mornings off, those are the rocks. And you have to put the rocks in first. You have to put your stuff in first before anything else. Before you open your calendar up to clients, before you say yes to projects, you schedule your time first. Because here's what happens if you don't. Somebody else is going to fill that time. If you're like a lot of us, you've accidentally ended up working on your birthday. You'll realize that you haven't actually taken any time off from your business in a year or so. You'll look up and sort of just wonder where the time went. But when you make yourself the priority, when you literally block off the time for what matters to you, then you build your business around that, not the other way around. And that's exactly what Kathy did. She blocked off Fridays. She staggered her clients so she'd have weeks of uninterrupted time. She told her clients up front, here's when I'm available and here's when I'm not. And you know what happened? She made more money than ever before. She built a business she loves, and she wrote and published a children's book that's creatively and personally meaningful. And this looks different for everybody. When we do this exercise, the rocks all look different. I've seen that the rocks are taking a week off for your birthday, or setting aside time to take your kids to camp or pick them up from camp. It's making sure you're taking holidays off. It's setting aside time to do a hobby. It's different for everyone based on what's important to them. So if you've been telling yourself that you can't make good money or have time for yourself, or that growing your business means necessarily sacrificing your life, I want you to let that belief go, because it's not true. You can have both. You can grow your business and make more money without sacrificing your time. But you have to decide that you want both, that you deserve both. That's important. And then you have to design your business around both. That's the only way to do it, with intention and strategies and tools. That's how Kathy did it, and that's how you can do it. All right, so if you know someone who would benefit from hearing Kathy's story, please send them this episode. I'd love for more women to hear what's possible when you design and work towards a business that puts you first. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.